Even if you have a good camera, your iPhone is the only camera that's likely always with you. Today, I want to teach you how to get the most out of the iPhone camera, especially the iPhone 17 Pro Max, using the ReeFlex app. But the same concepts apply to any other phone. The reason I'm using the ReeFlex Pro camera app is that the standard camera app doesn't give you all the options you need, like a histogram, manual focus, and control over shutter speed. The first useful feature I always turn on with any camera is the grid. I like to either place my subject in the middle of the scene or use the rule of thirds. You don't need to follow either of these rules, and you can find your own style, but having some measurements is always nice. Another setting I use often is activated by clicking on this eye icon. It enables something called peaking. Peaking means the app shows you what's currently in focus by highlighting the edges in green. That helps you make sure your subject is in the focus, or lets you adjust focus manually using the slider, something you can do with the standard iPhone app. For example, in my scene, I have two subjects, the bushes in the foreground and the building in the background. At first, focus on the foreground using the manual focus slider, and as you can see, the background is blurred, giving the phone an artsy look. Then I will use the slider to move the focus back, and the green edges help me see what's currently in focus. Now, the picture looks more normal. You can also achieve the same effect by tapping on the subject, but won't be as precise as using manual focus. The second option I usually use is white balance. Your camera automatically finds the white balance in a scene, and based on that, your photo will appear warmer or colder. But even on expensive cameras, the white balance isn't always set correctly, and sometimes you want it to be different to convey a certain mood. For example, here, I increased the white balance to 6300 Kelvin to make the photo warmer. This makes it look like it was taken closer to golden hour or sunset. Then I decreased the white balance and took another photo. This time, the image looks colder and gives off a different feeling. I found setting the white balance important, especially when taking photos of people, since everyone has their own preference. For example, I took a few photos of Tanya, and she often prefers warmer skin tones, even though the cooler version is actually closer to how she looks in reality. The next setting that can make or break a photo is the exposure slider, shown as EV in the middle of the screen. It is often the most important setting. The exposure slider does a very simple job. If you slide it to the left, the photo becomes darker. If you slide it to the right, it becomes brighter. This is also a good time to talk about two important settings that help you decide if your photo is too dark or too bright: zebra and histogram. Starting with zebra, you can activate it by tapping the zebra icon. The zebra function helps you control exposure by showing striped patterns, called zebras, over areas that are too bright or reaching a specific brightness level. These stripes don't appear in the final image or video. They're just a visual guide on your screen. By adjusting exposure until the zebra pattern appears only on highlights like skin tones or bright reflections such as the sky, you can prevent overexposure and retain detail. It is especially useful for videographers who need consistent, accurate exposure without relying on auto settings, and it is one of those features I simply can't live without. The second important setting you should keep an eye on to avoid messing up your photos is the histogram. You can activate it by simply clicking on the histogram icon next to the zebra icon. The histogram will then appear on the top of your screen. A histogram on a camera is a visual graph that shows how brightness is distributed in your image, from dark shadows on the left to bright highlights on the right. It helps you see if your shot is underexposed, overexposed, or well balanced. By checking the histogram, you can adjust the exposure to avoid clipping details in the shadows or highlights. It is a precise way to ensure your image has the right tonal range, especially when shooting in tricky lighting conditions. To put it simply, you don't want the histogram to be too far to the left or right. Ideally, it should have a simple bell curve shape. You can also adjust exposure by changing the shutter speed instead, by fixing the ISO and only increasing or decreasing the shutter speed. Shutter speed controls how long your camera sensor is exposed to light. A fast shutter speed like 1 to a thousandth of a second freezes motion and reduces blur but lets in less light, making the image darker. A slow shutter speed like 1 to 30th of a second lets in more light and can create motion blur, which is useful for creative effects or low light shots. Balancing shutter speed helps you capture sharp, well-exposed photos depending on your subject's movement and lighting conditions. For example, here I set the shutter speed to 1/10 of a second, and as a result, Tanya and others appear slightly blurry, giving the photo an artsy vibe. Another example is when the horses were passing. I took photos with different shutter speeds. If you put the photos next to each other, you will notice that in one, with a fast shutter speed, it looks as if the horses are standing still even though they were moving. In contrast, the photos taken with a slower shutter speed shows the movement of the horses, giving the image a sense of motion. For slower shutter speeds, you often need a tripod, but if you don't want to use one, you can use the ReeHeld long exposure camera app instead. The app is extremely simple. You just set the shutter speed as you want, for example 5 seconds, and then take a photo without using a tripod. You can do it handheld, as the name of the app suggests. The result is that the statue and the building in the picture stay sharp, while only the water fountain and people are blurred, which is exactly what you want from this scene. Another important thing to note when taking photos with an iPhone is which lens you are using. The best iPhone model has 2 cameras, while the iPhone Pro Max has 3, an ultra-wide, a wide, and a telephoto lens. The ultra-wide lens on the iPhone is 13mm, which is quite wide. This lens is great for landscape shots or when you want to capture more of a surrounding in the frame. The downside is that the sensor size of the ultra-wide lens is smaller, so it is not ideal in low light, and lens correction can make body proportions look a bit unnatural. On the other hand, you can take creative shots like this one with the ultra-wide lens. The main lens is the best overall option. It has the largest and brightest sensor, giving you the most dynamic range. Its focal length is 24mm, which isn't perfect for natural face proportions, but is better than the ultra-wide. It is especially suitable for full-body shots. The telephoto lens on the iPhone is 100mm, which is great if you want to zoom in a bit more on your subject, for example, when taking portrait shots. If you want to get even more zoom on the iPhone, you can use something like the ReeFlex G-Series Super Telephoto 240mm lens. I made another video focusing on phone accessories and lenses from ReeFlex, which work best with the ReeFlex app. You can watch that video next. Thanks for tuning into Tecmo, and I will see you in the next one.